how you can use valuation in a business deal. Hi everyone, I'm Josh Horn of Horn Valuation. I help business owners and attorneys in business valuation issues. And what I have run into a lot recently is a situation where someone needs my assistance valuing the business, and I'm valuing the business as is, typically as a stock valuation. And the deal will probably go down as an asset sale between two parties. So how do you connect those two worlds so it makes sense to everybody? That's what we're going to go through today. And with this example, I think it'll make a lot of sense. So here's an example of a company I might have valued and how I might have come up with the numbers for the valuation. And because you're a smart audience, I'm going to throw a couple of wrinkles into this, and I think you'll be able to follow along with some careful explanation on my part. So in this particular example, I valued the operating business at roughly $403,000, which was just the cash flows of $64,000 divided by roughly a 16% risk rate. So you see these numbers here, 64, 15.9%, and that's roughly $403,000 for the operating business. That's the business. If we were to come in and say, I'm going to buy this business without any excess assets or liabilities on the books or any kind of silliness that sometimes can come into a private business, and we're going to get into this in just a minute, that's what we would pay for it. And you might ask, Josh, what is this $141,000 of non-operating assets we're talking about? So this is where I know you're smart and I know you're going to be able to follow along with me. So this is a significant add back that I see pretty often. And in a lot of cases, we have excess cash, excess accounts receivable, whatever it is. In this case, what I had was a situation where there was a significant above necessary level of working capital in the business. So, and it was comprised mostly of accounts receivable. So I calculated that excess over here on this little spreadsheet here. And you don't have to worry about this too greatly because you're going to be working with somebody like me that's going to help you through this, right? And they're going to go through the detailed analysis and figure out how this matches up with other companies in the industry. So when I did my analysis, I figured out that, wow, that's a lot of excess receivables on the books. So that added a piece to the operating value of the company. And when I was done, I came up with a value of $544,000 for this business. Now, what is often the case is that the buyer looks at this and they go, wow, that's a lot higher than I thought. Why is it so high? I thought that the business might be worth a little less. And so I walk them down this path, and by the time they're done, they understand how this all comes out. So this is where the value I come up with and a deal intersect, how that looks. So let's look at the potential deal structure in this scenario. So recall I valued the business at roughly $544,000. In a lot of cases, the seller is going to walk out with some assets and pay off some liabilities. Not always. Important to nail this down, all right? In this case, a possible deal structure is that the seller is going to walk out with roughly $246,000 of assets, which would include those receivables and other current assets, and they're going to pay off some current liabilities. So the remaining amount that would be due the seller is roughly $309,000. Now let's stop here for just a minute, because this is a time when sometimes the seller gets confused. The buyer gets excited because they go, oh, okay, now it makes sense. The seller goes, now wait a minute, I just got a haircut here. No, you didn't. All right, because anything you walk out with is going to be a reduction in the value. All right, so you walk out with any cash, receivables, etc. That's going to be subtracted from the value that is determined when you're valuing the company as a whole. All right. Now, the buyer, now they have a little bit of disappointment headed at them, because guess what? They're short on the working capital needed to run the business, which basically means, can you meet payroll? Can you pay the next check run, etc.? You need to have enough cash in there to run the business. So that's when you need to add back another $94,000 to come up with the 403 determined in the first step. Recall, the operating value of the business, which is where we started, right? So you can see the pieces of how the valuation of the company as is will connect to a real life deal and how those pieces interact. So what do I want you to take away from this today? First off, understand that using rules of thumb and not going into a deep analysis of the company could result in a serious under or overvaluation of the company. Recall where I started here, and I went past this pretty fast, had a $141,000 add-on to this business for value, and that was related to these excess, what we call non-operating assets. If you bought an antique car today and you found $100,000 in the trunk, would you just ignore it? Well, of course not. That would be added to the value of the car. So it's a similar principle here. That excess money is in the business. Sometimes I run into this situation where the personal checkbook and the business checkbook are kind of, they're kind of the same thing. That can happen a lot. And so that was necessary to get the right value. Secondly, who is keeping what in the deal? This is very important to understand too. This is a conversation I had with the buyer. We talked about this, and one of the things that I told him is that it's easier to understand the math if you basically purify it, as I like to call it. In other words, the seller walks out with the current assets and pays off the current liabilities. It's much easier to understand that. Now, that may not be practical depending on the situation, but it's easier to understand. And when I walked him through that, who's keeping what, and they sat down and they looked at it, it made a lot more sense to both sides. Once you understand that the business has been valued correctly, who's keeping what, you'll be able to figure out what a deal looks like. And that's ultimately where you're headed. What does that look like? And then you'll be able to connect business value with a deal. This is Josh Horn, CPA of Horn Valuation. I really appreciate your time. Have a great day.